Hi, Snehashish. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Priyanka. Thanks.
Hi, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Sorry for that technical glitch, but all good now. Hello everyone. Salamat pagi semua. It brings us great pleasure to present here at the Jakarta edition of the World Financial Innovation Series. First of all, thank you all for attending this session. My name is Sneashish Khan. I head the data partnerships for APAC and Middle East for TeleSign. I'm pleased to share this stage with my colleague, our co-founder and CIO, Stacy Stubblefield. We will talk about how TeleSign helps financial institutes and e-commerce businesses to protect and secure their businesses and also their valuable customers and buyers from fraud. Over to you, Stacy.
Thanks, SK. So just to give a little bit of background about who we are, I'm one of the co-founders of TeleSign, and TeleSign is a two-factor authentication service provider. We also provide communication solutions both via SMS, so text messages, and voice. And in addition, information around phone number identities. So various bits of information about any phone number that any of your users may enter into your website or mobile app. We've been doing this since 2005, so we've been working on it for over 15 years, really consider ourselves the leader in this space, and are working with a ton of web properties and mobile apps around the world. And just to give you an idea of our size, we do over 1 billion transactions a month. So doing quite a bit of authentication. Some background. So like I said, we started in 2005. We were one of the pioneers of two-factor authentication via text message and voice. And just for anyone who's wondering what that is, and I assume pretty much everyone listening to this probably knows what two-factor authentication is, but just in case you don't, that is when you're trying to log into a website or create an account and you need to enter in your phone number and receive a one-time passcode at that phone number to prove that you are who you say you are, that you're not a fraudster who has stolen credentials, and that you're not a bot that's trying to create an account somewhere. That's the service that we provide in addition to the intelligence around that phone number. So we started that in 2005. We worked with a ton of large companies explaining, that eventually the mobile number would be a unique identifier worldwide. That really caught on. And then in 2010, we started to expand on the phone number intelligence that we were providing to our clients. So really what happened was fraudsters started to get smart about the phone numbers, basically about being able to acquire phone numbers easily. And so we had to help our clients determine which phone numbers were acceptable and which were more likely to be associated with fraud. Then in 2016, because we had built out such a robust SMS delivery system worldwide, very reliable at global scale, our clients started requesting that we send other types of communications. So until that point, we were really sending almost entirely two-factor authentication, SMS messages. Starting in 2016, we started sending other types of alerts and notifications, other types of SMS messages, and really built out our CPaaS stack. CPaaS being communication provider as a service. And then in 2017, TeleSign was acquired by Bix, which is a telecom based in Belgium. It's one of the largest telecoms in the world that you've probably never heard of, but it carries a lot of back-end traffic. So back-end voice calls, SMS messages, even roaming traffic. So if you go from one country, say you go from some country to the UK and you're roaming in the UK, they're probably facilitating that roaming. And because of that, they see a lot of traffic worldwide. And they also, because of that, have direct connections to many, many mobile carriers around the world, over 700. So some of the services that we provide, as I discussed earlier, SMS, of course, which are your basic text messages, sounds like a really easy thing to do, right? You just, most people think of SMS, they pick up their phone and they send an SMS message, their friend gets it, like pretty simple. But when you're sending globally at scale, billions of transactions, it can become quite a challenge. And so that is why it really makes sense to work with a global SMS provider that's trusted by major companies around the world. In addition, we have a product called Score, which provides a score around how risky a phone number is on various different, from various different perspectives, how risky it is to accept that phone number for registration or to allow a two-factor authentication to that phone number. And we'll discuss more how that score is derived later in the presentation. We also have Voice, which is voice-based two-factor authentication for one, where we send one-time passcodes via voice. In addition, we also have a voice API where you can do more complex voice interactions, much like an IVR, programmable IVR, or programmable voice, really. It doesn't have to be an IVR. And then Phone ID as well, which is really one of our first data products around phone number, but it includes information around who is the carrier, and that includes down to the underlying carrier. So like, for instance, Google Voice or Pinger or Burner app, something like that. You can really get detailed information, as well as the type of phone, again, which can be really, really important for stopping fraud. If it's a VoIP number, for instance, that's not a phone number that you typically want to accept because it tends to be high risk. And fraud is a global problem. I'm sure that you guys know, fraudsters are not limiting themselves to one area of the world. It happens everywhere. And you can see the fraud trends over time. We saw steady increases 2015 through 2017. 2018, fraudsters took a break. Don't really know what happened. Maybe they got lazy, but they're back in action in 2019. And then especially 2020, we of course don't have the final numbers yet, but we expect it to be really a record year on the fraud side, simply because so much has moved online. The attack surface has really widened in the year 2020. So it'll be interesting to see those stats when they come out. And I will send it over to SK now to talk about APAC.
Hey, thanks, Stacy. Yes, like you said, fraud happens globally, but unfortunately, APAC still has the largest contribution of losses from fraud. As you can see, 59% of the global fraud is happening in APAC within our region. And unfortunately, Indonesia is ranked #1 globally on online frauds and very closely followed by Philippines. This is a very vibrant market, we know that, right? And APAC constitutes one of the largest population centers in the world, obviously. But the other important thing to note here is, every 1 in 5 consumers in this region have been victims of fraud. The other important aspect to note from a fraud perspective, when you're looking at your fraud losses from business, what has happened in the last couple of years over the trends on fraud is the average value per transaction for fraud has gone up by $26, while average value of transactions, of genuine transactions, has gone down by $21. So which means while fraud is increasing, the value of fraud is also increasing. Hence, the losses are just going to mount and become bigger. Now, how do the businesses in APAC feel about fraud, right? As you can see, the businesses didn't feel. This was a survey conducted by Experian on, it was an identity and fraud survey conducted in 2019. And very overwhelmingly, as you can see, more than 50% of the businesses feel and agree that, they have seen increase in fraud in the last 12 to 24 months. They do realize that, yes, the losses are mounting and they're feeling the impact of growing fraud in their annual P&Ls. Now, impact of online fraud on the financial sector, right? I don't think I need to say this much, but I think one of the biggest losses that you can have is your brand reputation. Customers lose faith, right? And that's something you need to curb. So there are obviously implications of financial losses, but the customer trust is something bigger. And that combined together is a is actually a figure which you cannot put in it takes time to restore consumer experience back. So as a consumer, when I'm trying to do an online, I always look at sites which is going to give me that security, that feeling that, hey, my data is going to be protected here, my transactions are secure. And that's what brands today are looking to build and exercise. Specific to Indonesia, yes, we see there is a digital boom happening in Indonesia. From about 30% smartphone penetration in Indonesia a few years ago to now, it's expected to be 70% plus by end of this year. So Indonesia is seeing a boom on the digital side. So there is obviously a lot of first-time smartphone users, which means there are a lot of first-time internet users. And because there are a lot of first-time internet users, there is obviously a problem because the awareness is going to be a little low in terms of data security. How do I manage my data in the online space? And which is why the fraud is actually, this becomes a very good market for the fraud. And which is why all the more reason a good fraud solution is required by businesses to protect the consumer needs. Because the first time experience needs to be good, else people will not be very hesitant to move. As we want to drive digital transformation, people will be hesitant to move that space. The preferred way to especially do online shopping or anything online today in Indonesia still remains mobile device, right? As you can see from the figure. And it's just mainly driven by the convenience, while the preferred payment patterns are bank transfers and credit cards, which means it gives an opportunity for fraudsters to actually steal identity and then actually steal your money quite easily. The growing fraud has been driven really that we've seen in this market by a combination of identity theft, where fraudsters are able to steal your identity. We know, e-commerce companies run very lucrative promotions, right, to get people on board. And not only e-commerce, even the wallet companies. And fraudsters tend to create multiple accounts and misuse this promotion, which is one of the biggest challenges that we have seen in this region. And obviously, there are malicious users, people who genuinely have an intent to fraud. And the popular frauds that we've seen in these markets are, the first-party frauds, account takeover, and chargeback, which is really, which causes a lot of losses and pain in the entire cycle and the consumer experience, besides just the financial losses. Stacy, would you want to walk us through on the other next few slides?
Sure, yeah, and just to jump into some of the fraud that SK was mentioning, we'll get into it in a little bit more detail. But basically, the fraudsters have a bunch of different ways to use their nefarious access to websites. And I'll get into some of those, but basically the way that they do it in many cases is they find new phone numbers. Typically, those phone numbers appear to be legitimate numbers, but they're actually VoIP numbers or other virtualized numbers. There's different ways to do it. You can throw a SIM card in a SIM box and make that look like a genuine mobile number, but you actually have programmable control over it, right? So it's more or less acting as a VoIP number. They also find ways to take over phone numbers of unsuspecting victims via a fraud called SIM swap. And the way that they do that is they typically socially engineer people that are working at mobile companies. And when they socially engineer them, they basically get the person working at the mobile company to believe that they are the victim. And the person at the mobile company then gives this fraudster access to the victim's account, thinking that they're giving the victim access to the victim's account. And so once the fraudster has access to this victim's phone number, they are able to receive one-time passcodes at that number and every other bit of communication, right? It's not just about one-time passcodes, it's also any messages that are being sent to this user, any phone calls that are coming to this user. So it's a really big problem when that happens. And then in addition, stolen credentials are typically used to take over people's accounts. Stolen credentials are basically a dime a dozen at this point. There's billions online. There's different ways to find them. You can buy them on the dark web. They're not very expensive. You can find them in other places on the clear web, right? So stolen credentials are a big business at this point. And then of course you always have genuine users that are just intending to commit fraud, and they're not really hiding it very much because they're not afraid of being caught for whatever reason. And so to get in a little bit more to the types of abuse and fraud that we see and that we help stop, promotion abuse, as SK was mentioning, a lot of websites will give incentives to sign up for a new account on the website. Maybe they give a coupon, maybe they give, $5, in your account, various different things that they do. So what the fraudsters do is they just create, dozens, hundreds of accounts, however many they can create, in order to take advantage of that promotion and make some money. And so we help with that by stopping them from creating all of those accounts. Affiliate fraud is another thing that fraudsters have been known to do. They sign up to get essentially a kickback from any company that they're sending either potential or actual customers to. So they find different ways to get people to sign up to be a customer of those companies, typically unknowingly. So in many cases, the victim is really the business, but the user signs up for something at the company. And then the fraudster gets a fee for finding that user and bringing it to the company. So that's another big fraud trend that's actually been around for a very long time and can be quite lucrative. Reshipping fraud is pretty nefarious, where a fraudster actually sends a package to someone to reship somewhere else, but the package was bought with a stolen credit card. Typically, the person in the middle who received the package doesn't even know that they're a part of this fraud, so it's pretty scary. Account takeover, extremely popular. Basically, all it takes is getting someone's credentials. There are billions of credentials available at this point online. You just find them, test them out, and log in. With two-factor authentication, obviously that helps a lot with account takeover, because not only does the fraudster have to get the username and password, they also have to have access to the potential victim's device or phone number. Identity theft, again, go online for the fraudster, go to the dark web, buy credit card information. Depending on how much the credit card is worth, you can buy it for as little as like $1 up to much more. But the amount of theft that the fraudster is able to do makes it worth it to them to buy that credit card information and go on a little spending spree online. And then finally, you have friendly fraud. Typically, this is really not, there's no nefarious intention here. It's just a person that buys something. Maybe they forget that they bought it. Maybe their kid bought it. Maybe someone else bought it and the person didn't approve it and they do a chargeback. So that's another type of fraud that we see occasionally. And then how can we help with some of these? That's probably the biggest question on everyone's mind. So we have various different products that can help with this. So let's go through some of the scenarios. Opening a new account and new registration. So the fraud that happens here is typically a fraudster is trying to open a bunch of accounts, maybe for promo abuse, maybe because they want to spam, or whatever happens to be. So how do you stop that from happening? Well, first you require that the user enter in their phone number. You check the risk score of that phone number to make sure it's not a high-risk phone number. And you check that risk score with us. We give you back a score, and then if it's a low to medium score, you go ahead and go through with verifying that phone number. So send a one-time passcode to the phone number to make sure that the number that the user gave you is actually the number that is sitting on the phone in front of them, and it's not some random phone number, right? You need to link this user with a phone number. And then in many cases, if it's especially a high value transaction or a financial, services transaction, you can even validate the identity information tied to that phone number. So you can either match the name and address provided by the user with the name and address on file with the carrier or with another identity provider, or in some cases, you can get back raw data actually and get the name and address of the user. So that's a very strong signal, and it's a great way to really know who your users are. On the payment fraud side and account takeover side, the flow is slightly different. So basically, typically what you want to do when someone is doing really a high value transaction or a login is check the phone number first and see whether the SIM has recently been swapped, meaning has the SIM card changed? Has the SIM card that's associated with this phone number actually changed recently, or has the phone number been ported recently? Because that's another way to potentially take over a phone number. If it hasn't, then you go ahead and do the phone number verification. So send the one-time passcode to the phone to make sure that the user has access to it. And also check the risk score of the phone number to make sure nothing weird is happening in the background with that phone number. Make sure it's still a low risk number. And if it is, and if the user verifies their phone number, then typically you're good to go. And again, I'll just quickly go through these, and we talked about this a little bit before, but the services that you use in order to perform those flows are SMS, our score, voice, and then also phone ID, which is the intelligence around the phone number. And voice verify, just to do a quick call out, a lot of people think of two-factor authentication only via SMS, but you can actually also send one-time passcodes via voice. It's available already pre-recorded in many different languages, like 80, I think over 80 languages at this point. And it's really great to help stop any type of social engineering attack, because it's much harder to socially engineer a one-time passcode from a voice from someone who's receiving a voice message. It's also great backup for SMS, because sometimes SMS can be unreliable at specific points in time. And with that, I will send it over to SK to really dive into some of our products in more detail.
Yeah. Thanks, Stacy. And as Stacy mentioned, TeleSign helps address fraud problems across life cycle. And today, businesses are actually grappling with complex and expensive solutions that's available in the market today to counter fraud. That's of course required because, like I mentioned, you need a robust fraud solution. However, TeleSign solutions require rather low investments, and you can almost immediately see impact. And these two services are Score and Phone ID that you see on the screen. When you look at Score it's a reputation score or a fraud score, as you may like to call it, which we deliver to our customers for a mobile number. The way scoring is done, it's basically based on 3 blocks of data and machine learning. Now, what are these 3 blocks? The first block is our own authentication network information. TeleSign being one of the largest players of A2P messaging and authentication, processing over 12 billion transactions on this. We have information on authentication and A2P usage of a lot of phone numbers around the world today. And with our traffic being used, our solution being used by globally, 21 of the top 25 online sites and many more, we have pretty much information about most numbers globally today in terms of their behavior on the authentication network, how many OTPs did they request in the past, whether the signals, the OTPs were successful, failed, velocity of OTPs, and so on and so forth. Besides that, the second block of the data is basically comes from our parent company, BICS, which helps us determine the validity of a mobile number and also certain behavioral aspects associated with the phone number. Lastly, the third and another important set is something again unique to TeleSign is we also maintain the largest global consortium of fraudulent mobile numbers. Now, this is a database that's contributed to by our clients around the world for every mobile number that they see that they deem high risk or they've identified as a known fraudulent, has been associated with the fraudulent transactions. Now, as you can see, these 3 data sets are something which is very unique to TeleSign and not somebody else that can replicate the data set. Now, when a phone number comes to us, it goes through these 3 blocks of data, goes through our machine learning, and we come back to you as a client with a score. The score is on a scale of 0 to 1,000, and obviously higher the score, higher the risk associated. Now, we don't always stop at the point of we don't want to work as a black box. We understand, clients need to understand a little more about the score than just telling, hey, this is a 925 high risk. We also come back to the clients with reason for why are we defining a score to be such, right? So we'll give you reasons such as whether it's based on velocity of transactions, any known past fraudulent behavior, and so on and so forth. When you look at the phone ID service, right? Now, phone ID service is a service that really complements the score service that we have. It helps understand more about the mobile number. So when you look at the solution portfolio, the SMS and voice is helping you validate through an OTP that the user is carrying that phone at this point of time. The score and phone ID is giving you more information about that phone number to help you predict the intent of the person trying on the website today, on your online site today. And so with phone ID, you get information on the phone, such as whether this current phone number is an active or inactive number. Is this a VoIP? Does it look like a bot? If it's an active and a valid number, is this phone currently in country or is it roaming? How old is the phone number? Like Stacy mentioned, you can also check whether there's been a SIM swap on this phone number in the last 24 hours or not, because that's really the critical window. And we can tell you that whether there's been a change of ownership on this phone number, which means that, hey, this phone number used to belong to somebody else a few months ago. Today it belongs to somebody else. So we will be able to help you determine that. So together, the score and the phone ID together form a very powerful tool to identify a fraudster very early in your journey. And this is what I was saying when I was talking about the risk classification, right? So when I give you a score, we are also giving you the reasons behind why a score has been classified such. So, the famous Nigerian prince, asking you for your details to steal. We will be telling you a score of 925 high risk, and against that, we'll be able to tell you that why is it high risk. So, for example, on this instance, for this number, we've been able to identify that, hey, there's something peculiar in the behavior that, this looks like more like a toll-free number, because probably it's got a lot of outgoing calls going in, but no really incoming calls. It probably shows that, hey, it shows a very high risk irregular activity, or shows like a very high short-term activity, which is to say that probably, it's requesting for OTPs from 5 different websites, 5 different e-commerce sites, or 5 different bank sites in the last 10 minutes, things like that. So those are predictive powers. And all this is being processed in real time when it comes to you. And our clients do see benefit when they consume our service, besides the score, to use these reason codes along with that into their final decision engine to finally arrive at a final go, no-go of that particular transaction. Just a very quick illustration of how our use case can flow, right? So this is really focusing on new user registration or account opening, where somebody's trying to apply for a credit card or a loan, or even on an e-commerce portal, for example, trying to register there, right? So users would enter the name, address, mobile number. So what we do recommend is when you send an OTP to the customer, after you validated through the OTP that the guy is really carrying the phone, which is really the first hygiene check that you would do. Second, like before approval, you should check with us information about that phone number, so where we can predict the score associated, whether it's a high risk score that we spoke about. We'll also give you information about the status of that phone, active, inactive, change of ownership, roaming, and so on and so forth. Once all that is established and you know that, okay, this number seems to be fine, we can help you then validate the name and address associated with the phone number, because in an application, somebody's declared a name and address for that user, right? So we'll help you validate through our combination of our data partners, which are authoritative data sources that we have working with us in the background, which are a mix of telecom operators, in some cases government database, and a mix of them, for us to predict that, hey, this phone number is associated with this name and address, which you can validate. And finally, you can also look at information around whether this is a prepaid, postpaid, and how old is that phone number. So all this information put together will help you make a better decision what you want to do with that particular transaction. A similar use case on online payment transaction or an account takeover. This is when probably on an e-commerce side, I've bought some stuff, and you feel that, hey, this was a dormant account trying to do a transaction of buying a high value service. Similarly, it's like you see multiple requests for login on a banking site. At that point of time, check with us the score of that phone, right? So we'll be able to tell you in real time any changes, anomalies in the behavior, which predicts an account takeover, which predicts any changes in behavior, we'll be able to predict you as a score, which you can then take. And at the same time, understand on the phone number whether a change of ownership has happened, is this a still active number, and so on and so forth. And we will also be able to guide to tell you that, hey, this looks like there's been a SIM swap on this phone number in the last 24 hours. So maybe you want to stay cautious. And that point of time, you want to either block that transaction or you may want to fall back on a second security check. So these are really how our clients have been using our use cases globally. Like I mentioned, our clients today are the largest e-commerce players, the largest fintech players, some of the largest banks in the world, some of the largest shared services across the world today. So with that, I'll just request Stacy to present a use case of one of our client, Atom. Stacy?
Sure, thank you. So Atom Tickets is one of our clients, and just to get you up to speed on what they do, they actually have a platform where you can go and buy movie tickets online, and they do quite a bit of promotion, so promotional promotions that they give to new users. And so, of course, what does that attract but a lot of fraud when it comes to signing up for new accounts, so that the fraudster can get the value of the promotion over and over and over again. And so they came to us and described the problem that they were having, and we came up with a plan for how they could stop that and actually determine when a user was legitimate and when a user wasn't legitimate. And so they installed, as SK and I both talked about, they installed Score along with verification, SMS-based verification, and they, as a result, were able to reduce their coupon abuse by about 80%, which significantly lowered their customer acquisition cost, because of course they were having to pay the cost of the promotion for every customer acquisition, many of which weren't real until they installed our system. So we were super happy about that. And then just to move forward and talk a little bit more about our customer success stories worldwide. As we mentioned earlier, we have customers all over the world. And so here's just a quick snapshot of some of the locations and the results of the customers. So for instance, in India, we had, for a customer, we stopped over 21 million fraudulent transactions in 1 year. Southeast Asia, we had, for a mobility customer, 89% of fraud registrations were stopped when they started using our system. And so you can see, we're very, very proud of the work that we've done with clients all over the world, and it's been extremely exciting and challenging this last 15 years. And so with that, I will thank SK for joining and also open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Snehashish and Stacy. There's one question from the audience regarding the vulnerability of mobile identity solutions. How vulnerable can they be?
So it's an excellent question. And so it really depends on what somebody means by vulnerable. So how vulnerable are mobile identity solutions? Really, the data that's coming from mobile identity solutions isn't particularly vulnerable, because especially the data that's coming directly from telecom operators, they tend to have a really high reliability, because in many cases they've seen the ID of the user. IDs are required in something like 60 or 80 countries worldwide just to get a SIM card. So it tends to be very reliable in that case. In addition, mobile identity information, if you're referring to the type of information that we're using to determine whether someone is risky, so the type of phone number, the carrier, the patterns that we're seeing across our clients, and also across usage in the back end of telecoms, that is extremely reliable data, because it's all telecom-based data, and it's extremely difficult to look like a legitimate user when you're not, especially in any kind of telecom context. Do we have any other questions, or SK, would you like to add on to that at all?
No, I'm good. I mean, it was fine. Any other questions, Priyanka? Or I know you probably overshot our time a little bit.
Yes,
Just
no
mindful of
questions
that.
as of now, Snehashish. But ladies and gentlemen, you can visit the TeleSign booth and you can meet Snehashish, Stacy, also other representatives, ask more questions, find out more about their solutions. So thank you so much, Snehashish and Stacy. That was a very interesting presentation, gave us a lot of insight, and we really appreciate TeleSign for being the gold sponsor for WFI's 2020 Live. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you so much. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.